Welcome back, everyone, to winter term. Thanks. Yeah. You see, Raquel, I was looking at you because I knew I could get a response. Thanks, Raquel. I might come back for some more. Yeah, great. Welcome back to winter term, and welcome to the first departmental seminar series of the new year. Today, the LSE Fudan Global Public Policy Hub is, what do we call it? Guest DJing, taking over?
No, sir.
So on behalf of Bingbin Meng, who is the co-director of the hub, I wanted to welcome you. I first want to just tell you a little bit about the hub. I promise it won't take long. But for those of you who don't know, the LSE Fudan Global Public Policy Hub has been in existence since 2019 and is a collaborative effort between, as you might expect, LSE and Fudan University in Shanghai. The idea behind the Global Public Policy Hub is to bring together scholars from various institutions, not just LSE and Fudan, but really especially bringing together folks from the so-called Global North and Global South who are working on issues that are relevant to global public policy around the world. Of course, not surprisingly, a lot of the folks who do work within the hub do work or are researching issues that pertain to China in particular. The hub has been in the department for now a year and a half, which we've been really excited by. And the hub, in addition to supporting research and researchers, it does usually monthly seminar events and sometimes additional ones. You're getting a taste of the types of events that we do today. But if this isn't enough for you and you want more, at 5:30,
another one.
At 5:30, we do a lot of events. At 5:30 this evening, in the Thai Theater in CKK, Major Ying is doing a book launch for her book on mental health and biopolitical paternalism in China, which seems really interesting. So please do. And one of our fellows, Yuan, is going to be as a discussant. But without further ado, I want to move to our other postdoctoral fellow, Zhuang Han. Zhuang is, as I said, a postdoctoral fellow here in the Global Public Policy Hub and the Department of Social Policy. He did his PhD at Cornell, where he focused on social inequality and labor markets in China's rapidly changing economy. His research, which he's going to talk about today, which is why you're here, examines how young migrant workers navigate precarious employment, particularly what are referred to as the Sanhe Gods, young people who've rejected traditional factory work for daily paid gig labor. This gets to a lot of fundamental questions that we're interested in here in the department that pertain to labor market transitions, welfare gaps, and how marginalized youth experience urban poverty in contemporary China. He's multi-method, so combines both quantitative and ethnographic methods to understand these structural inequalities with quite a number of implications for social policy and how social policy responds to precarious work and youth unemployment. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to you. Welcome, everybody, Zhuang Han.
Thank you. Can I use this?
Please, whatever you'd like.
All right. So good afternoon again, everybody. So thanks again for Tim's generous introduction, and thanks everybody for providing me this chance to give a detailed introduction of my current and also my dissertation project. I have been studying this group called the Sanhe Gods, which is a marginalized youth group living in Shenzhen in extreme precarity in the last 3 years now. So I'm currently also working on revising this work into a couple of different papers and also trying to use the material as the central part of my first book. But with that, any comments or feedbacks will be greatly appreciated. I also want to remind you, please feel free to interrupt me as as you have questions coming up during the process, some of the terms may not be familiar for everybody. And I hope this presentation can be as interactive and conversational as possible. All right. So here's what. Oops. Since the.
Just try again.
You click on it?
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, sure. So here's my brief agenda for today. I will begin by introduce you my field in Shenzhen, some background and why I come up the research question I'm having now. And I will also give a little bit more details about the mixed methods approach, focusing on my field work and some major findings and the theoretical contribution I'm trying to make here. So to start with, as I just mentioned, the term Sanhe Gods or Sanhe Dashen in Chinese refers to a group of young men, mostly rural migrants who live in the margins of Shenzhen. Rather than committing to long-term factory work like their parents' generation, they rely on daily paid jobs or short-term, often informal gig work. They live in extreme precarity, sometimes going days with little food or shelter. Their name, Sanhe Gods, comes from this precarious lifestyle because only gods can survive days without food, without drinking, or with really minimum sleep. Despite being young and able-bodied, they refuse what they see as soul-crushing factory job. Most of them are single male born in 1980s, 90s, or 2000. As you can tell, they are really young, and they often have really limited education. Most of them barely finished the 9-year mandatory education in China. A lot of them dropped out of school. The slogan of their lifestyle is working one day and resting for three, which is both a survival strategy and cultural statement. I know a lot of us can be really jealous about this slogan, their lifestyle. They claim this is a way of rejecting the dominant logic that links up unpaid hardship and obedience to success. So where is Sanhe? The Sanhe in their name comes from a human resource market near the Foxconn factory in Longhua. So Foxconn built its Longhua factory in 1988, which soon became the company's largest in China. In 1992, two brothers from Chaoshan founded the Sanhe Human Resource Company, whose main clients were factories like Foxconn. During China's early industrial boom, Sanhe grew rapidly. At its peak, it partnered with over 30,000 companies and sent more than 1 million migrant workers to factory each year. In 2006, Sanhe moved into a new commercial complex in Jinle village, which quickly attracted dozens of competing job agencies. Over time, Sanhe became shorthand for the entire labor market area, a first stop and temporary home for migrant workers seeking jobs, cheap food, and a sense of community. In 2008, a viral NHK documentary brought the Sanhe God to public attention. The documentary triggered both condemnation and sympathy. Some saw these young people as lazy or deviant, while others viewed them as victims of structural inequality. Increased visibility also turned Sanhe into a political problem. The government recognized its economic role as a labor hub, but feared the social risks of such large gathering of jobless youth, especially young men. During the pandemic, the authority used the health regulation to crack down on the area, renaming it the Square of the Hard Workers. So as you can tell, these two are basically the same places, but they redecorated it, and the name is become like the Square of the Hard Workers, basically the same place. Yet Sanhe did not disappear. Its community and culture simply moved 15 minutes away to the Longhua bus station. The new space, often called the new Sanhe, is where my fieldwork began in 2023. So this is the bus station, and everything conducted once in the square here, moved here. So before diving into, also I first learned about Sanhe in 2020 during my fieldwork in rural Yunnan. A Buddhist monk showed me an online video of those young men saying, this is what life will be like for students who go out to work in the factories. That moment stayed with me. It raised a fundamental question that drives this project. Why do these young people reject stable factory work and instead choose precarious lives? What do their refusal tell us about the changing meaning of work, value, and aspiration in post-reform China? So before diving into the empirical findings, I want to take a step back and explain how I position this study within a broader intellectual landscape. What kind of conceptual challenge I'm trying to address through the lives of Sanhe Gods. Throughout my PhD training, I have been preoccupied with fundamental questions. Where do social change come from? To approach this, I have found it helpful to distinguish two key dimensions along which change unfolds. The first is who drives it, whether it comes from actors within the system or from outside of it. The second is its pace, whether change happens gradually and steadily, or it happens suddenly and rapidly. When we cross these two dimensions, we got this simple 2x2 matrix that helps map different modes of transformation. Starting from the bottom right, we find politics. Change initiated from the within and proceeding at a steady pace. Above, that says reform, still internal but occur rapidly, often through decisive policy shifts. On the left, we have transformation emerging from those excluded from the system. In their rapid form, we find revolution. In their slow and steady form, we find passive resistance, the gradual erosion of legitimacy, dignity, and participation led by those on the margins. So most of social science has historically concentrated on the first three: reform, politics, revolution, as they are more visible and measurable. But the fourth type, passive resistance, is rarely taken seriously until recently. The people who occupy this space are often invisible. Their lives are treated as residuals, their voices excluded from dominant narratives of progress. Quantitatively, they appear as error terms or outliers, exceptions rather than signals. Yet, as scholars like James Scott remind us, those so-called outliers often tell us the most about the system itself. Before dismissing certain populations as statistical noise, we must ask, are they excluded by chance or by design? If exclusion is structural, then these margins are not anomalous. They are evidence of deeper social pathologies. The slow burn of discontent, disillusionment, and the refusal that accumulates in everyday life may not look like change, but it is often where change begins. What later erupts as revolution first takes shape as the quiet erosion of space in the system. So this brings me to my first reason for studying the Sanhe Gods. Their everyday lives embody this form of passive resistance. Through their small refusal, they expose the limitations of a system that equals endurance with virtue and efficiency with worth. Their lives make visible the hidden costs of a society where progress depends on the constant reproduction of precarity. The second reason I study this group comes from the demographic side of my training. Much research has focused on identifying what condition demographic change can lead to development and growth. My dissertation contributes to this debate by bringing the labor market into sharper focus. Specifically, I propose that understanding demographic dividends requires paying attention not only to the number of working age individuals, but to the match between human capital and employment opportunity. I call this broader framework the human capital transition, or HCT. The main idea of human capital transition is illustrated here. It traces two trajectories: the expansion of non-agriculture employment opportunities and the rise of human capital through education. At the early stage, as is shown here, both lines are low. Most people in agriculture with little or no formal schooling, as industrialization, urbanization, and professionalization advance. Employment outside agriculture expands rapidly, first in labor-intensive manufacturing, then in higher skilled technological and service sectors. Parallel to this, education improves. The state invests in compulsory schooling as a form of social welfare and nation building, while families invest in education to secure mobility for their children. This mutual reinforcement produces a virtuous cycle. More education generates more skilled workers access better jobs, and society collectively believes that hard work and endurance will lead to upward mobility. However, the turning point comes when the expansion of non-agriculture employment slows or reverses. Yes.
I'm sorry for the interruption. What's the x-axis?
This is basically time.
Is
time.
Time.
Oh, yeah. So, however, the turning point comes when the expansion of non-agriculture employment slows or reverses, whether caused by economic stagnation, automation, political reform, or external shocks like pandemics. Such contraction erodes social mobility. When opportunities shrink, the perceived return to education fell. Families begin to doubt that hard work will pay off, and the growth of human capital plateaus. This is the moment when optimism turned to disillusionment, when the moral economy of meritocracy began to lose legitimacy as a cultural ideal. My argument is that China now stands precisely at this turning point. After decades of rapid expansion, economic growth has slowed and employment opportunity have heightened. As a result, doubts about social mobility have spread across social classes. Among the working poor, these doubts are expressed through everyday acts of refusal. The Sanhe Gods represent the most radical version of the refusal, not because they reject the work itself, but because they reject the moral contract that equals suffering with reward. Their decision to opt out exposes the erosion of the faith in 吃苦 or eating bitterness as credible path to success. 吃苦 basically means you need to endurance can lead to mobility and future success. What looks like idleness is, in fact, a diagnosis of a broken promise, the recognition that the link between effort and mobility, once central to China's reform era, has begun to shrink. So with those motivations in mind, let me now return to the empirical world and explain how I studied these young people living at the city's margins and what their lives reveals about the meaning of cultural invention. For this dissertation, I conducted 10 months of field work. During this time, I lived alongside the Sanhe Gods and carried out 59 in-depth interviews. Beyond formal interviews, I engaged in countless informal conversations on sidewalks, in dormitories, at job markets, and on the internet, of course. I shadowed 8 individuals for extended periods and built close relationship with several of them. My goal, however, was not to romanticize or simply record their voice, but to situate their stories with a broader structural and historical frame. To do this, I complemented my ethnographic data with quantitative sources from the World Bank, United Nations, and China's National Bureau of Statistics. By combining qualitative depth and demographic analysis, I sought to connect the personal and the structural, the daily survival of young men at the Longhua bus station, and the macro-level transformation that shaped their world. So this is a picture from my field. That is one day when I was going out working as a security guard. And those 2 pictures are in the logistic factory. And when I was taking that job, that was during the mid of what called Double 11 festival. Basically, it's the Black Friday or the holiday season in China. So you can imagine how many packages are there. And Shenzhen is where all the factories concentrated in China. So from Shenzhen, all these packages goes to even all over the world, I would say. And the daily paid workers often get like the most exhaustive work because you are just like the one-time tool for the factory owners. And a lot of people told me there's slogan like work for one day and playing for 3 is not just a way for escape, but a strategy, because after this kind of heavy work, you really need 3 days to recover and come back to the factory. All right. So yeah, in this process, of course, my identity as Han male helped me to access to these jobs, right? I can go to these daily paid jobs, go to these factories and stay with them overnight in the square without any problem. It also helped me to open a lot of conversations. And I remember how I started to recruit interviewees is once a middleman, a job agent learned that I'm a PhD student, and he was so curious. I had to tell you about my life story. And of course, I carried the privileges my interviewees did not, right? The safety net of my family, a return ticket, and an academic purpose. I never sought to erase that distance. Instead, I treated proximity, both physical and emotional, as a way to build understanding and to interpret their narratives with care and precision. So one of my central arguments is that the term Sanhe Gods have evolved beyond describing a specific group in a specific place. Today, it functions more as a subculture, a shared sensibility and a collective response to shifting social and economic conditions. This subculture didn't emerge in isolation. It was made possible by 2 major structural conditions. The first of which is the transformation of China's labor market. Around 2010, China began experiencing large-scale job displacement. 2 powerful forces drove this shift. First, as labor costs rose, many foreign invested factories, especially in low-end manufacturing, moved their production to low-wage countries in Southeast Asia. Second, domestic firms increasingly turned to automation to reduce costs and dependency on human labor. During my fieldwork, I visited several factories and had invested heavily in automation. One manager told me their new production line required only 1/20 of the workers compared to 20 years ago. yet output remained the same or even higher. This transformation produced the two key outputs. On one hand, short-term and giga work surged during production peaks, replacing the long-term contracts that once defined factory employment. Companies began hiring workers just in place through labor dispatch agencies, offering high wage and bonuses when demand spikes, and releasing them without benefits when demand fell. On the other hand, as technology advanced, the space for low-skilled labor shrank, both in quantity and in pay. This explains the paradox we often hear in China today. Employers complain that no one wants to work, while workers insist there are no jobs. The truth is that skilled workers are scarce, and unskilled workers are increasingly unnecessary. For the younger generation of migrants whose parents once rode the wave of factory expansion, the path forward has narrowed dramatically. As a result, many spend longer periods in Sanhe-like spaces. Circulating between jobs are relying entirely on day labor. Over time, some stop viewing these places as temporary shelters and begin to embrace the Sanhe lifestyle itself. The second structural condition is both socioeconomic and psychological. Based on my field estimates, the monthly cost of living in Sanhe ranges from 360 to 1,080 yuan, so roughly 36 pounds to 100 pounds. That is about 1/10 to 1/4 of Shenzhen's citywide average. Such affordability makes it possible for individuals to survive without earning factory they think as exploitative. And this is the dorm they normally live, and that kind of bed is normally, so they have 8 bumper bed in one room, normally shared by 16 people, but most of the time only half or 2/3 of the bed are occupied. And that costs about 15 RMB, that's 1.5 pounds per night. And the meal like this costs about 1 pound. And you will have like 1 meat dish, 2 or 3 veggie dish, and rice and the soup. So, but the appeal of Sanhe isn't only economic, it's also emotional and social. Many of my interviewees and Sanhe was the only place where they said Sanhe was the only place they felt safe. Within this community, they could temporarily escape the social expectation that labeled them as fame or wasted people. Many described themselves as having seen through life or 看透了. What they have seen through is the broken promise of stability for their parents' generation, enduring factory hardship, could still buy a house, support a family, and secure a future. That promise no longer holds. One young man put it bluntly when I asked if he hoped to marry. He told me, I work on the assembly line screwing parts, marry a girl working on the assembly line, raise children to work on the assembly line. Our family will be slaves for every single generation. So why not just end this vicious cycle now? His words are painful, but they capture something profound. The collapse of faith in mobility and the moral exhaustion that comes when endurance no longer leads anywhere. Another important lens for understanding the Sanhe phenomenon is gender. During my fieldwork, it was striking that I could hardly find any women who identified themselves as Sanhe gods. This leads me to ask, are there female Sanhe gods at all? The answer is complicated. There are certainly women who voluntarily live in conditions of comparable precarity, yet very few adopt the identity of Sanhe gods. This absence can be traced to at least two structural reasons. First, women are often excluded from the social economic strategies that enable male Sanhe Gods to survive at the bus station. Women who attempt to sleep outdoors in order to save money quickly attract attention from both local officials and male Sanhe Gods. Unlike men, their presence in the bus station square is frequently rejected out of concern that they might cause trouble. At the same time, they are perceived as easy targets for whom may seek to extract benefits. As a result, for women who wish to take a break from factory work, the cost of remaining in Sanhe is significantly higher than for their male counterparts. They are also largely denied access to the informal brotherhood that provides men with social and psychological support in this space. My dissertation is deeply influenced by Paul Willis' classic work of Learning to Labor, where he explains how British working class elites end up in working class jobs. Every time I read Learning to Labor, I'm struck by its tragic core. Willis' subject sees through the myth of meritocracy embedded in the education system. They resisted, mocking authorities, breaking school rules, celebrating working class masculinity, yet they ultimately reproduce the very class order they reject. Their rebellion, meant to escape domination, is what keeps them trapped within it. For me, the central question becomes, can those at the bottom, those who have seen through the myth of stability and upward mobility, tell a different story? My answer is both no and maybe. Starting with the no, like Willis lays, the Sanhe Gods operate under profound structural limitations. For many, refusing to participate in the system is the only form of agency they can still claim. One young man told me, capitalists would rather put down the capitalists would rather pull milk down the drain than feed the poor. We'd rather waste our labor than work for the heartless factory. So some of this idea comes from the early documentary or kind of semi-propaganda a lot of Chinese youth have been watching when they went to school. So they have seen, keep telling this story that one of the reasons for World War II is because capitalists would not try to be good-hearted and share the food, and in order to keep the market order. So that's where their language comes from. However, on the individual level, this kind of resistance rarely leads to liberation, as you can see so far. Their lives remain materially harsh and socially precarious. But I think there is still a maybe. Change may not emerge from individual defiance, but from the cultural resonance of their stance. Across China, many young people share the Sanhe Gods' quiet refusal to play by the rule of endless striving. This ethos now has a name, Tangping, or lying flat. In that sense, the Sanhe Gods represents not an isolated anomaly, but an early expression of a generational consciousness, one that questions the moral legitimacy of sacrifice without reward and redefines what it means to live meaningfully under precarity. The discourse that today's lying flat culture reacts against is the long-standing ideal of eaten bitterness, or 吃苦. The idea emphasizes the moral value of enduring hardship, of willingly withstanding deprivation or pain in exchange of future gain. In the next few slides, I want to trace how this idea has been reinterpreted from antiquity to the present. Understanding this genealogy helps us see why contemporary youth, including the Sanhe Gods, are increasingly rejecting it. The concept dates back more than 2,000 years to early Confucius classics. Over time, its meaning have evolved through different political and social economic contexts. I call shiku a layered historical construct. Just like the onion here, each era adds a new layer of meaning, yet the earlier layers never disappear. They remain embedded within it. The earliest discussion of shiku appeared in texts such as Mencius, which states, when heaven is about to confer a great responsibility on any man, it will exercise his mind with suffering, subject his sinew and bones to hard work, expose his body to hunger, put him to poverty, place obstacles in the paths of his deeds, so as to stimulate his mind, harden his nature, and improve wherever he's incompetent. So for those of you who are more familiar with the Chinese classic version, that's the 天将降大任于世人也 text. In this early Confucian worldview, eating bitterness was a moral code for the educated elite. Hardship was seen as the pathway to virtue and wisdom, a test through which one cultivates moral strength and earns social authority. But this was also a class discourse. The bitterness worth enduring here was often intellectual rather than physical. Labor such as farming in the field does not count. In modern times, particularly during the late Qing dynasty and Republic eras, eating bitterness was nationalized. Reformers and revolutionaries reinterpreted individual moral ideal into a collective narrative of national endurance. They argued that China's historical suffering, what was later called the Central of Humiliation, was itself a form of shiku. Just as the virtuous individual grows through hardship, so could the nation emerge stronger through collective suffering. The ideal of eating bitterness was further reshaped under Mao and the socialist revolution. The Chinese Communist Party inherited the nationalist interpretation, but added two new dimensions. First, shiku became directly linked to labor and production, enduring physical hardship, especially through manual or industrial work, was framed as the moral foundation of socialism. Propaganda of the time celebrated peasants, workers, soldiers as modes of selfless endurance, whose labor built the collective strength of the nation, and also socialism. Second, the party used the shiku as a disciplinary mechanism for cadres and officials. It was evoked to combat complacency, privilege, and corruption, reminding party members that moral legitimacy depended on their willingness to suffer alongside the people. The transformation in these two eras marks a crucial shift. Shiku was no longer only a personal moral obligation, but a patriotic and a collective duty. After China's economic reforms in the 1980s, individualism and market logic gradually re-entered the social order. The pursuit of material success and personal achievement, the Chinese version of the American dream, became the dominant culture idea. Within this new moral economy, shiku was reframed as an individual capacity. Hard work and endurance still were less as political duties or moral virtues for the collective. The party still claims they are, but more importantly, they became the personal means to secure wealth and success. At the same time, the discourse retained its disciplinary power, though its target shifted. Under Mao, shiku functioned primarily as a moral expectation for party cadres to ensure integrity and cube privilege. In the reform era, that disciplinary tone was redirected toward ordinary workers, especially youth. Yet the logic remained persuasive, but it was backed by economic mobility. During the boom decades, hard work did bring rewards. Many believe that enduring hardship today would lead to prosperity tomorrow. For future migrants and other disadvantaged groups, Shiku even become a progressive language, a way to justify upward mobility through endurance and hard work. But after 4 decades of growth, the landscape has shifted. Economic expansion has slowed, and several critical changes now distinguish the present from the early reform years. First, China has reached the peak of its working age population, while the overall educational attainment of this generation has risen dramatically. The old factory-based mode of growth built on cheap, unskilled labor can no longer sustain this labor force. The economic faces mounting pressure to create white-collar jobs, especially in the service and tech sectors, for millions of educated young people. Yet, global recession, domestic restructuring, and automation have made this goal elusive. Youth unemployment has climbed to historical heights, while opportunities for low-skilled workers have eroded even further. Across classes, people now feel trapped in what many describe as the competition crisis. The 996 work culture, working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, became its defining symbol. In 2018, Alibaba's founder, Jack Ma, famously or infamously endorsed this regime, calling it a blessing. Here are his original words. Personally, I believe that being able to work 996 schedule is a tremendous blessing. Many companies and many people don't even have the opportunity to do 996. If you don't work 996 when you are young, when will you ever be able to? If you go whole life without experiencing 996, do you really think that's something to be proud of? His words sparked widespread outrage. So before his speech, most of the young people or the public called him the Daddy Ma Yu, which reflected the culture by that time. And I think around that speech, after that, people start to picking him as the capitalist whose only right is to choose which which light to be hung when revolution actually happens. So there's a big shift. For many young people, this was the breaking point. The discourse of Shiku was no longer credible in an unequal system where effort did not guarantee fairness. As one viral response put it, the more bitterness I eat, the more I'm exploited. When I interviewed the Sanhe Gods, many of them told me they had lived this way since the early 2010s. Back then, their lifestyle was dismissed as personal failure. They were accused of not being willing to eat in bitterness. But in the past few years, as mass competition intensified across social strata, their quiet refusal began to resonate. Middle-class professionals increasingly saw themselves reflected in the Sanhe Gods' critique of endless work. For many white-collar workers, office towers of China's megacities now resemble new kinds of assembly lines, governed by similar 12-hour shifts, 6-day work weeks, and rigid hierarchies. Even the pay often differs little from factory wages once adjusted for living costs. This is why I argue that the Sanhe Gods' passive resistance matters. Few can or should live as they do, but their lifestyle has become a cultural mirror, reflecting a generation's exhaustion and desire for autonomy in a system that demands constant sacrifice without proportional reward. When I was preparing these slides, I asked the ChatGPT to generate an image of the future of work. Now, surprisingly, the Sanhe Gods were nowhere in that picture. Well, their future is yet to be defined as automation and AI continue to expand. Probably that's my next work. Their future may be uncertain, perhaps even desperate, but their act of refusal, of lying flat rather than chasing untenable success, forces us to rethink the cultural politics of labor and value in and outside the current capitalist system.